A black security guard intervenes and saves a family from a dangerous situation at a supermarket. Instead of being met with gratitude, he faces suspicion from the police. However, just minutes later, his courageous actions cause everyone to rethink their own biases. Will those around him learn to overcome prejudice? Let's explore this touching story. Before we begin, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Inside the supermarket, the morning atmosphere remained peaceful. Bright lights illuminated every corner of the neatly arranged shelves, reflecting off the shiny tiled floor. The sound of shopping carts rolling filled the air, mixed with the voices of employees chatting with customers and the clicking of barcode scanners at the checkout counters. John. A black security guard walked slowly through the aisles. His sharp and calm eyes didn't miss a detail. To him, this job demanded constant vigilance. He wore a dark blue security uniform with a small radio clipped to his shoulder and a pair of black gloves tucked into his pocket. His muscles were evident beneath the tight fabric, but he maintained a gentle demeanor, not imposing on the customers around him. With his tall and strong physique, John often made a strong impression, but what he encountered more frequently were suspicious and doubtful looks. He was used to being judged the moment people saw him, simply because of his skin color. Every day, John tried to push aside that heavy feeling and focus on his duties. Don't let it distract you, he often reminded himself. He had learned that being a good security guard wasn't just about showing strength, but also about being attuned to the smallest signs. Today was no different, at least, not yet. The supermarket's automatic doors hissed open, and a white family walked in. The father, tall with salt and pepper hair, wearing a luxurious trench coat, strode in confidently. He carried a phone, eyes glued to the screen, almost oblivious to those around him. Behind him, the mother. A slim woman with blonde hair, wearing a light sweater and jeans, followed closely, holding the hand of a small child, in a colorful coat, wide-eyed and innocent. From his position near the door, John gave the family a polite nod and a smile. The father didn't respond, simply passing by as if he didn't see him. The mother didn't look back either, pulling her child quickly through the door. But the child glanced at John, curiosity mixed with a bit of surprise, as if wanting to say something, but was pulled away by their mother before they could speak. John exhaled softly, the smile still on his face. He was used to such reactions. Suspicious glances, avoidance. None of it bothered him anymore. Here, he was just a security guard, a figure standing watch in a world where people never thought they'd need him. He wasn't offended. Because to John, actions and results mattered more than any look. He continued to walk past the shelves, occasionally glancing toward the checkout area, where a young cashier was organizing items on the shelves. John sensed something was off, a gut feeling that made him a little tense. In this line of work, he had learned that instincts should never be ignored. He adjusted the radio on his shoulder and headed toward the checkout to check things out. On the other side of the supermarket, the White family had started shopping. The father was still glued to his phone, occasionally nodding absent-mindedly at his wife's words. The mother carefully picked out items, with the small child standing next to her, tugging at her coat, eyes wandering over the colorful products on the shelves. John, from a distance, observed every move, not because he was suspicious of them, but because alertness was second nature to him. Everything seemed normal, but the uneasy feeling in his gut hadn't gone away. Anxiety began to creep into John's mind. He scanned the supermarket from the produce section to the frozen food aisles, but couldn't pinpoint anything specific. The automatic doors continued to hiss open and shut, with customers coming and going, but everything seemed peaceful. Or at least, it appeared to be. He stopped at the checkout, nodding at the cashier, who gave him a nervous smile. "Is something wrong?" John asked, his voice calm and steady. The cashier shook her head, but her eyes betrayed some worry. "I'm not sure," she whispered, "but something feels different today." John tightened his grip slightly, feeling the cold metal of his radio against his fingers. His instincts were becoming stronger. Everything seemed fine, but the silence and calm often signaled that Trouble was on the horizon. He knew that with just one slip, things could spiral out of control in an instant. From afar, the White family continued their shopping. The father dropped a few items into the cart, while the mother rummaged through the shelves. The child, standing beside his mother, glanced over at John once more, wide-eyed and curious. John recognized that look. The look of a child still untainted by the prejudices that adults carry. But before he could respond, the child turned away, following his parents deeper into the store. John sighed softly, adjusting his uniform on his shoulders. He took a deep breath and refocused. Just another ordinary day, he told himself. But deep down, he knew that wasn't true. In the peaceful atmosphere, something was simmering, waiting for the right moment to explode. The supermarket now hung heavy with tension. The automatic doors hissed open. Again, and a thin, nervous-looking man entered. He wore a black hoodie with the hood pulled up, his face hidden beneath the thick fabric, leaving only his darting eyes visible. He didn't grab a shopping cart, nor did he appear to be looking for any items. John stood near the door, his eyes locked on the strange man. The man walked deeper into the store, his hand thrust into his hoodie pocket. John's instincts were now undeniable. A robbery was about to go down. In that moment, John placed his hand on the radio, quietly signaling the cashier. Before anyone could react, the man pulled out a handgun, raising it high, and shouted, "Everybody down! Move and I'll shoot!" The chilling sound of the command echoed through the store. No one reacted immediately. A few seconds of stunned silence passed air. Then panicked screams erupted. The nearest customers abandoned their carts, scrambling to hide behind the shelves. The sound of falling items and crashing carts filled the air with chaos. The robber marched straight to the checkout counter, where a young cashier stood trembling, his gun pointed directly at the girl. "Open the register, now!" he yelled, his eyes bloodshot as if violence could erupt at any moment. The cashier nodded in fear, fumbling to open the cash drawer. She tried to remain calm, but her shaking hands slowed her movements, further testing the robber's patience. John stood nearby, hidden behind a pillar, his eyes tracking the robber's every move. He knew that the decisive moment was approaching, but he couldn't act rashly. He needed a flawless plan. One wrong move could cost someone their life. Quickly, John glanced over to the other side of the supermarket. The White family was huddled behind a shelf near the checkout. The father hand stood in front, his eyes trying to appear calm, but betraying his worry. The mother held their child close, using her body as a shield. The child, dressed in the colorful coat, occasionally peeked out, frightened but curious. The sight of them made John feel an even greater weight of responsibility. "Hurry up, I don't have time to wait." The robber yelled again, his voice growing more tense. He kicked the counter, causing the register to shake. John observed more closely. The man's hands were shaking, the gun wavering. This wasn't a professional robber, but his lack of experience only made him more dangerous. A panicked and desperate man could do anything. In that moment, John made his decision. He crouched low, carefully moving along the wall near the checkout counter, trying to get closer without drawing attention, but before he could act, the robber suddenly spun around, his gun now pointed directly at the White family. "No one call the cops. If I see anyone move, this kid gets it," the robber threatened, his eyes wild with fear. The mother burst into tears, holding her child even tighter, while the father clenched his fists, trying to protect his family but too scared to move. John tightened his fists, trying to remain calm. Every instinct was warning him that the moment of truth was here. He couldn't let anyone get hurt, but he also knew that reckless action could push the situation out of control. The robber began to back away, still pointing the gun at the family. "Step up and I'll shoot right now," he yelled, throwing the entire store into a tense silence. John could feel his heart pounding in his chest, each drop of sweat falling from his brow. He knew that he had to act now, before it was too late. He crouched lower, his eyes searching for any weakness in the robber. The gun was wavering, the man's hand shaking with his ragged breaths. This was the opportunity. If he moved quickly and precisely, the man wouldn't have time to react. John took a deep breath, preparing himself for the decisive moment. It was just him and the robber now. Caught in the heavy tension of the moment, he knew that in the next few seconds, the lives of the terrified people around him would depend on his composure and courage. Uwa. John tensed every muscle, keeping his breathing light and steady. The world around him seemed to hold its breath, and all he could hear was the pounding of his heart in his chest. Everything around him moved in slow motion. The panicked footsteps of shoppers hiding behind shelves, the stifled sobs of a mother clutching her child in fear, and the robber's restless eyes scanning for an escape route. John inched forward along the wall, his fists clenched tightly in his pockets, ready to act when the moment was right. The robber, driven by desperation, suddenly swung his gun toward a white family, Soul. The father stepped in front, raising his hands as if to shield his family, though his fear was obvious. The mother huddled closer, pulling her child into her arms as if to hide him from the dangerous world around them. The child peeked out, his innocent eyes wide with confusion and fear, waiting for something he couldn't yet understand. John knew this was the moment to act. Every second of hesitation would only make things worse. He took a few silent steps forward, one hand on his radio, a silent signal to his teammates that the situation was coming to a head. But before he could act, a water bottle fell off a nearby shelf, the clatter shattering the silence of the store. The robber whipped around, startled by the sudden noise. John knew this was it. The split-second moment when the robber's guard was down. With all his strength and speed, John lunged forward, his body like a storm crashing into the robber. He seized the robber's wrist, twisting it until the gun slipped free and hit the floor with a cold, echoing clatter. The robber snarled and thrashed, in desperation, throwing punches and kicks wildly, but John held firm. Using his body weight, he pinned the robber to the ground, locking his arms behind his back. Sweat dripped down John's brow, but he refused to loosen his grip for even a second. In the struggle, John's eyes flicked toward the white family. The mother still cradled her child, sobbing in fear, but unable to look away from him. The father stood frozen, seemingly unable to believe that the security guard he'd overlooked had just saved his family. The little boy gazed up at John, his fear replaced by admiration, a simple but profound emotion. Police sirens echoed in the distance, flashing red and blue lights reflecting through the supermarket's glass front. The automatic doors slid open, and Frey, 2 officers stormed in, weapons drawn, ready for action. "I've got him," John called out quickly, his voice calm but firm. The officers rushed over, handcuffing the robber as John stood and adjusted his uniform. The robber was dragged away, still shouting and struggling in vain, but he was no longer a threat. John exhaled deeply, feeling the tension slowly drain from his body. As things began to settle, the father approached John, his face a mixture of embarrassment and gratitude. "Thank you. Really, thank you," he said, his voice shaky with emotion. John gave a quiet nod, his expression calm but patient. The mother and child followed. The boy tugged at his mother's hand, then smiled up at John. "You're my hero," the boy whispered, his innocent voice filled with trust. The child's smile eased something inside John, a reward more valuable than any recognition. John didn't need gratitude or acknowledgement. For him, saving lives wasn't about seeking praise. It was about doing what was right. In that moment, he knew he'd fulfilled his duty. Not just as a security guard, but as a human being. John stood silently in the supermarket, catching his breath after restraining the robber, but just when he thought it was all over, one of the officers gave him a cold, suspicious look, his hand resting on the holstered gun at his side, ready to act as if John himself were a threat. "Who are you?" the officer asked, his voice sharp and distrustful. There was no gratitude in his tone, only suspicion. John responded calmly, "I'm the security guard. I stopped the robber before anyone got hurt." But the officer wasn't satisfied. "Why did you intervene?" The doubt in his voice was clear. John was used to this kind of questioning. It wasn't the first time, and it wouldn't be the last. In the eyes of men like that officer, the color of his skin was always a cause for suspicion. The officers continued to scrutinize him, as if he were a potential criminal. One of them glanced at John's uniform, then at the hands that had subdued the robber. They didn't see the brave guard who had prevented a tragedy. They only saw a black man, someone to keep an eye on. Before John could say more, the white father stepped forward, a mix of confusion and guilt in his eyes. "He saved us," the man said, as if surprised he had to explain. He looked at John with both gratitude and regret for his earlier judgment. "He stopped the robber, or else." The man trailed off, unable to meet John's gaze for long. The officer hesitated, but his skepticism lingered. "You're sure he wasn't involved?" The question hung in the air, thick with tension. The mother, still holding her son, stepped forward, her voice breaking. "He saved my son," she cried. Without him, she couldn't finish, her eyes filling with tears. The little boy slipped from his mother's arms and approached John. His round eyes filled with admiration. "You're my hero," the boy said softly, but his words echoed through the quiet store. In the boy's innocent eyes there was no distinction of skin color, only gratitude. Nearby, the supermarket staff began to gather, and soon applause broke out. A wave of appreciation spreading through the store. Other customers joined in, creating a moment of warmth and acknowledgement. Still, one officer couldn't hide his scowl. "You got lucky," he muttered. "But next time, leave it to the police." His warning felt like a thorn hidden within the celebration. John didn't react. He was used to this lack of trust. He didn't save lives for praise or recognition. He did it because it was the right thing to do, and he didn't need anyone's approval to know that. The father hesitantly extended his hand. I'm sorry I doubted you," he murmured, his voice heavy with remorse. "Thank you for saving my family." John shook the man's hand firmly, offering a gentle nod. "We all make mistakes," he said, his voice calm but kind. The mother, still holding her son, looked at John with tearful eyes. "You gave us a second chance," she whispered. "I'll never forget that." The boy clutched his mother's hand, but kept his gaze fixed on John. "I'll tell my friends about you," he exclaimed, his smile pure and bright. John smiled for the first time that day, feeling a weight lift from his heart. The boy's innocent admiration was a gift beyond measure, a recognition free from prejudice or doubt. Outside, the police sirens faded into the distance, and life in the supermarket slowly returned to normal. Thank yous echoed one last time as people left, leaving John standing quietly in the now peaceful space. He looked around the store, a world returning to its routine, but a part of him had changed. He didn't need the officer's gratitude or the crowd's recognition. He just needed to know he'd done the right thing. With a deep breath, John adjusted the radio on his shoulder and headed for the exit. He was back in his role, the silent protector, always ready to face danger for those who needed him. Whether they saw it or not, John stood motionless in front of the supermarket, with the lights inside and outside blending together, creating a tranquil space after the chaos. A cold wind swept through the street. But he didn't feel the chill. His mind was still swirling with emotions from what had just happened. The police sirens had faded away, leaving only silence, as if the life-or-death encounter was nothing more than a fleeting nightmare. Everyone had returned to their lives. But for John, today had left a lasting mark. He wondered if what he did would ever be recognized. He already knew the answer. It wouldn't. Doubts, prejudice, and the officer's warning about not interfering echoed in his head. He had saved a family, but he was seen as nothing more than a troublemaker. The officer's face, with eyes full of suspicion, haunted him. If no one believes me, what will I do next time? John asked himself, but deep down, he knew he would act the same way he had today. Not for recognition or praise, but because he couldn't do otherwise. It was who he was. When he saw someone in danger, he had to act. That was the duty of a protector. And above all, the duty of a compassionate human being. Just as he was about to leave, a small voice called out from behind. "Mister!" John turned to see Dos, the little boy, the child he had just saved from the robbery, running toward him, his colourful jacket fluttering in the wind. The boy's face lit up with a bright, innocent smile. His eyes were no longer filled with fear, and in only some pure gratitude and admiration. The boy's parents followed closely behind, their eyes full of emotion, as if they had finally understood something important. The father held his son's hand, but there was no longer any trace of the defensiveness or mistrust he had shown toward John earlier. Instead, he stopped in front of John, bowed his head slightly, and extended his hand. "I was wrong about you," the man said in a low, sincere voice. "Thank you for saving my family. I can't imagine what would have happened if you hadn't been there." His voice trailed off, as if words weren't enough to express his emotions. John shook the man's hand firmly, with a grip that was gentle, yet resolute. "We all make mistakes," John replied, his voice calm but warm. "What matters is that we correct them." The mother stood beside her husband, holding her son close to her chest. She nodded softly, tears welling in her eyes. "You gave us a second chance. I'll never forget that." The boy remained at his mother's side, but kept his gaze fixed on John. "I'll tell my friends all about you," he said loudly, his voice clear and joyful. The boy's smile made John smile for the first time all day. It was the best reward he could ask for, recognition without prejudice or doubt, just genuine gratitude. As the family walked away, John stayed where he was, watching them disappear into the glow of the streetlights. A strange sense of relief washed over him, as if a heavy burden had been lifted from his heart. The world might not be fair, but if he could do the right thing just once, that would be enough. He turned back toward the supermarket, stepping through the automatic doors, to the familiar sounds of shopping carts rolling, barcodes beeping, and customers chatting. Life went on, as if nothing had happened, but to John, everything felt different. He wasn't just a security guard anymore. He had become someone who made a difference, at least for the family he had saved. John walked down the aisles, adjusting the radio on his shoulder out of habit. Everything seemed back to normal, but inside, a new sense of peace had settled. He knew he would continue doing this job, whether anyone noticed or not. He would always be there to protect and act, even if no one ever saw. With each step, he reminded himself, the world needs people who are willing to act, even if no one knows their names. And he would keep doing it, because he believed that every good deed, no matter how small, could change someone's life. The supermarket buzzed with life again. The familiar sounds filled the air, and the rhythm of daily life moved forward. But inside John, he knew today had been a turning point. He hadn't just done his job. He had acted in line with his conscience, and that was what mattered most. As he walked toward the back of the store, the lights above cast his shadow on the polished floor. It was the shadow of a man, not a celebrated hero, but a silent guardian, always ready to stand where needed. John continued down the aisles, his shadow reflecting off the glossy tiles. The familiar noises returned, the rolling carts, the barcode scanners, and the chatter of customers. Everything seemed to fall back into the rhythm of Amavo everyday life. But inside John, he knew something had changed forever. Passing the checkout counters, where employees were busy organizing goods, a young cashier glanced at John and gave him a soft smile. "Thanks, John. Not everyone would have had the courage to do what you did." John nodded in response, but said nothing more. For him, gratitude wasn't what he sought. He hadn't acted for recognition. He did it because it was the right thing to do. He headed to the security office, where the surveillance monitors displayed every corner of the store. The head of security sat in his swivel chair, eyes fixed on the screens. When John entered, he turned and gave a small smile. "You did well, John. I saw everything on the cameras." John nodded, his expression neutral, as if the praise meant little to him. He was used to Heat acting quietly, without anyone knowing. "Without you," the head of security continued, "things could have gone a lot worse. I was just doing my job." John replied simply, his voice steady and calm. He didn't want to dwell on the conversation. To him, the matter was already over. After checking in and handing over his shift to the next guard, John left the security room and made his way toward the store's exit. His thoughts lingered on the incident. From the police's skeptical looks to the boy's innocent gratitude, he wondered, will there ever be a day when I'm seen differently, when the color of my skin isn't a reason for suspicion? John knew the answer. It would be a long road ahead. Prejudice was deeply rooted in society, and he would have to face it again and again, but he also knew he couldn't let it stop him. He had chosen to be Toi protector, not just for this store, but for anyone in need, no matter what they thought of him. The cold wind outside blew hard, making him pull his uniform collar tighter. The night sky remained dark, but somewhere on the horizon, a faint glimmer of sunrise was beginning to emerge. A simple image, but one that brought Toi hope. No matter how long the night lasts, the light will always come. And then John stepped out of the supermarket and stood on the sidewalk for a long moment. The city's sounds began to rise. Cars passing by, crowds moving hurriedly. Amid the flow of people, John stood there alone, like a steady rock in the midst of a rushing stream. He knew life would go on as it always did, with moments of doubt, judgmental glances, and dangerous challenges. But he wasn't going to stop. As he prepared to move forward, a colder gust of wind blew through, but he didn't feel the chill. His heart felt lighter. The recent event had reminded him that courage always mattered, even if not everyone recognized it immediately. One right action was all it took to make the world a little better. He walked along the sidewalk, blending into the moving crowd. The dim yellow streetlights cast his shadow on the wet pavement. A simple but powerful thought echoed within him. I will keep going. He knew tougher days lay ahead. There would be moments of danger, times when he'd face suspicion again because of the color of his skin. But that didn't matter. What mattered was that he would always act, because each time he helped someone, the world improved, even if just a little. He recalled the gaze of the young boy, those clear eyes free of judgment. That gaze was the reason he did all of this. It represented his belief that a better world could be built if enough people were willing to do the right thing. John walked into the night, a quiet man in the stream of life. But he didn't feel lonely. He knew he didn't need fame or recognition. He knew he had chosen the right path, and that was all that mattered. As he turned onto an empty street, the streetlights faded, yielding to the darkness. But inside John, a steady flame continued to burn. He would keep going, not because anyone asked him to, but because this was what he was born to do. And he knew, when the world needed a protector, he would be ready. John kept walking, his footsteps echoing into the night. Steady and calm, just like the man himself. The darkness that enveloped the streets didn't make him feel alone. He knew that this journey wasn't for the faint-hearted. The soft glow from the streetlights reflected his shadow on the damp pavement, a reminder that protectors like him would never stop moving forward. When he reached his small apartment, John unlocked the door and stepped inside, leaving the city's noise behind the closed door. The room was small and simple, with only a few basic pieces of furniture, a bed, a table, and an old lamp. There was no luxury here, but it was where Honey found peace, after days spent facing life and death situations. John gently removed his worn-out uniform, hanging it on the back of the chair as if setting down the burdens of the day. But even though he wanted to relax, his thoughts still circled back to the events from earlier. He sat down by the window, gazing out through the cold glass. The dim streetlights glowed faintly, casting blurry shadows on the walls. Below, the city was still alive. Cars passing, footsteps blending with the night breeze. Life carried on, unaware of what he had done today. But John knew that what he did, even without recognition, had made a difference. And that was enough. The clock ticked steadily, its rhythm matching his life, quiet, persistent, and unyielding. He thought about the family he had saved. The boy's words, simple but meaningful, echoed in his mind. "You're my hero." Those words needed no fanfare, no applause, but to John, they carried more weight than any praise ever could. They reminded him that courage and kindness always mattered, even when the world couldn't see it. John told himself, tomorrow will be a new day. He knew the world wouldn't change overnight, and prejudice wouldn't disappear easily. Judgmental eyes would still follow him, not for the first time and certainly not for the last, but he also knew that he would keep standing no matter what. He understood that being a protector wasn't just a job, it was a mission. Not everyone would understand it, and no one needed to. He would protect those who couldn't protect themselves, no matter what they thought of him. For John, doing the right thing was enough. The cold wind blew outside again, or making him pull the curtains tightly shut. He got up, poured himself a glass of water, and leaned against the windowsill, looking out at the city settling into sleep. In the faint light, he saw others walking in the shadows. People like him, quietly working to keep the world safe. And John knew he was part of that. He didn't need anyone to remember him. He wasn't a hero in the eyes of the crowd, and that didn't matter. He would keep doing what he did, because he knew that even the smallest act of kindness had the power to change the world. At 2 a.m., John turned off the light and lay down on his bed, letting the room sink into darkness. Tonight, he would rest, knowing that tomorrow would bring another battle. Maybe not with criminals, but with the invisible challenges and prejudices that awaited him. But no matter what, he was ready to face them. Outside, the wind continued to whistle through the streets, carrying a chill. Somewhere in the city, someone might need help again. And when that moment came, John would be there, quietly, without fanfare, doing what needed to be done. His sleep was light and peaceful, his mind at ease after a long day. He knew this journey would never truly end. There would always be people in need of protection, and there would always be those like him, willing to rise to the occasion. No one forced him to do this, but he would keep doing it, because he believed that the world became better when people acted without expecting anything in return. And tomorrow, when the sun rose, John would put on his worn uniform once again, stepping into a new day with a determined heart. He would be there, in the shadows or in the light, protecting those who needed him, because that was what he was born to do. For John, that was all that mattered. The morning light crept through the curtains, and casting faint rays on the walls of John's small apartment, waking him from a short but deep sleep. He sat up slowly, feeling the morning chill lingering in the air. Outside, the city was waking up, car horns and hurried footsteps, beginning to echo along the streets. John stepped into the bathroom, splashing cold water on his face, the coolness jolting his senses awake. He looked at himself in the mirror, his expression calm, his eyes steady but filled with quiet determination. Yesterday's events were behind him, but their impact lingered in his mind. The Huoyunol boy's heartfelt thanks, the skeptical looks from the police, and the relief in knowing that Chen-A family was safe and because of his actions. He made himself a cup of coffee, letting out the rich aroma fill the small space. As he sipped from his cup, he stood by the window, looking down at the bustling street below. Vendors opened their stalls, and passers-by hurried along. A new day had begun, bringing with it countless stories and challenges. He put on his uniform, worn, but to him, a symbol of responsibility. Adjusting his radio and belt, he took one last glance in the mirror. There was no need to be special, just ready every day. For him, that was all that mattered. As he stepped out of his apartment, blending into the flow of the city, the familiar sounds of urban life surrounded him. Car horns, street vendors, and children's laughter echoed all around. John felt lighter inside. Though the world was still full of injustice and prejudice, he knew that every small act of kindness counted. On the way to the supermarket, he came across an elderly man struggling to cross the street. Amidst the busy traffic, without hesitation, John stepped forward, raised his hand to signal the vehicles to stop, and gently helped the man cross safely. The old man smiled in gratitude, but John just gave a small nod before continuing on his way. Acts like these had become second nature to him, helping others without expecting recognition or appreciation. When he arrived at the supermarket, he walked through the glass doors, feeling the refreshing cool air from the AC system. The sounds of barcode scanners, cartwheels rolling, and soft conversations filled the space, creating the familiar rhythm of a new day. His co-workers greeted him with friendly nods, and a few regular customers recognized him, smiling. John responded with a simple nod, needing no flowery words or attention. He was there to do his job. As he entered the monitoring room, the radio on his shoulder buzzed. "John, there's an issue at the entrance. We need your help." Without a moment's hesitation, he stood up and headed out quickly. Situations like this were just part of the job. Each incident, no matter how big or small, required him to stay calm and composed. At the entrance, a man was shouting at the receptionist, his face flushed with anger. The receptionist looked flustered, clearly unsure of how to defuse the situation. John approached, his voice steady. "What seems to be the problem?" The man spun around, glaring at John as if ready to unleash his fury on him. "Who are you? I don't need your interference," he yelled, eyes blazing with rage. John remained unfazed, his expression calm. "I'm here to help. We can resolve this together." John's calm tone caused the man to falter, as though his anger had hit an invisible wall. No one expected to encounter someone as unshakable as John. Gradually, the man's voice softened as he mumbled something under his breath, then stormed off, leaving behind a quiet sense of relief. The receptionist exhaled deeply, thanking John. He gave a small nod and returned to his duties. This wasn't the first time something like this had happened, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. He knew every day would bring new challenges, and he had to be ready. Back in the monitoring room, John glanced at the surveillance screens, watching as the supermarket returned to its usual calm. People flowed through the aisles, life moving on uninterrupted, but John felt no sense of pride, only relief in knowing that, once again, he had done the right thing. The day was still young and he didn't know what awaited him. But one thing was certain. Whatever came his way, he would face it with calmness and responsibility. This was the path he had chosen. The path of a quiet protector, always there when needed, even if no one noticed. For John, just knowing he had helped someone, be it a young boy, an elderly man, or a receptionist in trouble, was enough to make the day meaningful. He continued to watch the screens as the flow of people moved steadily through the supermarket. Life went on, and no one realized that just moments earlier, a tense situation had been quietly defused. John felt no need for recognition, nor did he expect any praise. People like him didn't do this work for glory. They did what needed to be done, then moved on to the next challenge. Outside the window, darkness was beginning to fall as the last rays of sunlight disappeared. The city never slept, and somewhere threats and challenges still lingered. John knew that, even while standing here, there would always be others in need of his help in the future. But for him, that wasn't a burden. It was a belief in the importance of what he did. He quietly returned the radio to its place and did a final check of the cameras. Everything was peaceful. He knew these moments of peace were what he worked to protect, not just for himself, but for everyone around him. Peace was precious, and sometimes, it could only exist thanks to people like him, the silent ones, always standing where they were needed the most. As he stepped out of the supermarket, and the night air hit him, cool against his face, John pulled up his collar, walking slowly along the sidewalk. The night sky was deep and dark, but the streetlights illuminated the path ahead, like tiny lighthouses guiding the way. In his heart, everything felt calm. He knew he had done his part for today. The streets were still bustling, filled with people rushing, some tired, others unaware that they had just been protected. John smiled softly, a smile meant only for himself. He didn't need anyone to know what he had done. What mattered was that he knew that today he had done the right thing. When he got home, he stepped into his quiet apartment, setting his uniform down on the chair. No one was waiting for him, no lights were on, but that didn't matter to him. This small room was enough to be his place of peace after a long day. He sat by the window, looking out at the city through the cold glass. The night wind whispered softly, carrying distant sounds of honking horns and hurried footsteps. Everything kept moving, without pause. A quiet sense of joy spread within him. Today he had protected those who needed him, and if tomorrow brought new challenges, he would be ready, as always. John lay back on his bed, letting the darkness envelop him, but before closing his eyes, he whispered to himself, "Tomorrow, I'll be ready again." No matter what came his way, he would keep protecting, keep moving forward, because this was the path he had chosen. Outside, the city hummed with its familiar rhythm. Somewhere, there would be moments that needed a protector, someone who didn't seek glory or praise, but simply had the courage and heart to do what was right. And when the time came, John would rise again, ready to face the next challenge. To him, this wasn't a sacrifice. It was his choice, his way of existing and contributing to the world. Because sometimes, the world doesn't need celebrated heroes, just quiet individuals willing to protect without asking for anything in return. And so, John closed his eyes, drifting into a peaceful sleep. He knew that, no matter how chaotic or calm the world became, he would always stand where he was needed most. In the darkness of the city, John slept soundly, knowing that tomorrow he would be ready for whatever came his way. Life isn't always fair, but every small act of kindness matters, creating change bit by bit. Courage doesn't need fanfare, and kindness doesn't require acknowledgement. That's how the world becomes a better place. We may not be heroes who can change everything, but every right action contributes to a brighter future. Like John, all we need to do is stand up and help, no matter the circumstances or doubts. That's how we make the world safer and kinder for everyone. If this story inspires you, follow our channel to discover more meaningful stories. Together, we can spread kindness and do the right thing every day. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell.